Hello, everybody. What's going on? My name is Jason Joseph, and this is another episode of Sharing the Mic with JJ. And today we have a really, really awesome guest on. All right, so this guy, there's a whole lot of credentials that this man literally has. He's the co-host of the 76ers Insiders Podcast Network with Lauren Rosen and also Nick Stauskas. He's the host of the 76ers pregame show on 97.5 The Fanatic and also the postgame show as well. And he's the TV play-by-play announcer for the Delaware Blue Coats and fills in for the radio play-by-play side of things for the Philadelphia 76ers. He's a graduate of Fordham University, and he's a WFUV alum, and he also does play-by-play for Eastern University football as well. This is my man, Matt Murphy. I hope I covered everything.
You crushed it. Jason, it's great to see you. Thank you for having me on Sharing the Mic with JJ. Happy to be here. It's always great to hear from Rowan people, and going back a few years, you were part of that initial group with the Delaware Blue Coats opportunities, which was so special. I know you were very passionate about just getting that opportunity. So to get to kind of work with you in some respects there, work alongside you there, and that was, a few years ago at this point. So it's great to see you again. Looking forward to catching up.
I appreciate you so much for doing this. It's really funny to me because, like, the Blue Coats, I always talk highly about the Blue Coats and even doing stuff with the Blue Rocks too. Just two incredible organizations, and I was just so happy that I got to be a part of that. And honestly, I learned so much from you. I learned so much from Alex and from Joe and from everybody that was in the organization. And and that was really awesome.
They've got a good thing going. They just won the championship, and the way that Rowan is involved, and huge shout out to team president Larry Milai, Alex Yo, Neil Hartman with Rowan, Derek Jones, Joe Kane on the Blue Coats side, Joe Richmond, a lot of people that you just alluded to. The team, it culminates with the championship in the 2023, end of the 2022-23 season, but bringing Rowan on prior to that, you and I both know it well. And you mentioned my time at Fordham. I think it's very comparable to what Rowan has going on right now. And hopefully will continue to set up so many people for success in the sports media, sports industry as a whole.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I want to get more into it, but first, I want to talk a little bit of some Blue Coats, and I want to talk a little bit Sixers first. I mean, you've been so you got to see them win last year, and just from last year compared to this year, okay, you have guys that are really talented like Ricky Council the fourth, and you still have guys like Jared Brownridge that are still on the team, which is absolutely crazy because Brownridge was still there, when I was there.
7 years.
That's
in Delaware.
Oh my gosh, that's really wild. But what do you like about this roster?
Well, outside of the roster, they have a new coach too, leading the show here.
I was going to talk about that.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll save that. But with the roster, you mentioned Brownridge. He didn't play in the showcase part last year, but then the Blue Coats retooled the roster to make that championship run. That's something that's so interesting about the G League, because unlike the NBA in-season tournament where it counts towards your regular season record and playoff positioning, in the G League, it's 2 seasons essentially, and you go back to 0-0. So you can, if something wasn't working, you can change your roster around, and you have a truly clean slate to do it. And they brought Jared Brownridge. They made other moves too, but they brought Jared Brownridge back in for the regular season last year. Now he's back again for this whole run, and he's still shooting the 3 ball as well as ever, one of the best shooters in G League history. But what I really like is how they reinvented their front court here with some extra height and some reinforcements in the big guys, because they didn't have Darius Baisley until recently, a former NBA first-round pick who's 6'9". They needed some extra height. And then they waived Javonte Smart, the Sixers, from his 2-way deal. Luckily brought him back because he's a critical piece to their group as a point guard. But they signed Kenny Lofton Jr., the former Memphis Grizzlies. So all of a sudden, kind of overnight, you end up with a front court of Darius Baisley and Kenneth Lofton Jr., which is just different than what they had in the beginning of the season. And you match that up with the other Sixers on the roster, like Ricky Council the fourth, like Terquavion Smith, who's been in like a 6th man role. And Council's shooting has probably been one of the biggest bright spots of the Blue Coats season so far, because He has this athletic side of his game. He's like a 6'6" wing, but he's shooting the three and his jump shot's better than scouts and prognosticators had expected him to do. And he's well aware that he's proving the doubters wrong so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were just talking about the staff. I wanted to kind of go into a little bit of the coaching side of stuff too. Kobe Carl is now one of the assistant coaches of the Sixers, and he was the head coach for a couple of years with the Blue Coats. But between Kobe Carl and Mike Longobardi's coaching schemes, what stands out to you as far as differences go?
Well, first of all, with Kobe Carl, congrats to him. It's not just players that get called up. Like Nick Nurse comes into town with the Sixers, and you're wondering like who's going to be on his staff. And it turns out that he takes from the G League and he promotes the G League head coach. Nurse has a long background in the minor leagues, so he can appreciate that. And Kobe Carl
and overseas too.
Right. He was in the British Basketball League. He knows the grind for these coaches, and I'm very happy for Kobe Carl to be on the NBA bench with the Sixers and Nick Nurse. He deserves it. They won a lot of games. They won that midseason showcase cup the year before. They made it to the finals. Unfortunately, lost the first time around, but then made it back. I mean, that's post bubble even. They lost in the finals, and then they made it back again and secured the deal. He leads them to the title. He gets a spot on the NBA bench. And then they end up bringing in the front office has done a great job. It was Prosper Karangwa, who's not only the vice president of player personnel for the Sixers, but was the Blue Coats GM. And now Jameer Nelson, the St. Joe's legend, was promoted to
Great
Blue
guy.
Coats GM. He was the assistant GM. So what they went out and did, they get a head coach, I'm sure in collaboration with the Sixers front office and Sixers coaching staff. They named Mike Longobardi head coach. So Kobe Carl's going to the NBA, and they pull a guy who's been in the NBA for so long to coach the G League team and get some head coaching experience. Mike has had 20 years as an NBA assistant coach. The players and staff call him Coach Longo, and something I really like about his style is a saying that they go with: dominate the simple. And I think that's transferable to really anybody in life. If you can master the basics of your profession, or in basketball, the basics of basketball, like rebounding and hustling and things like that. If you dominate the simple, the results are going to be better more times than not.
I do want to get into, the big league club, just a little bit, because they also had a coaching change from, last year to this year. And I know that you've actually got to talk to Nick Nurse like a couple of times, and you've had him on. And you've been able to talk to him. What's he like, and how do you think that he has actually changed the culture around the Sixers landscape?
He's been awesome. Yeah, part of the radio broadcast for the Sixers is always a pregame like exclusive coaches interview with Tom McGinnis. So if I'm filling in for Tom McGinnis, then I'm going one-on-one with Nick, and I'm at all the media availabilities kind of day to day after practice and things like that. So I've been around a little bit now as we're just into the new year of his first season, 2024 part of the calendar. I feel as though he's always trying to find that extra edge, any sort of advantage that he can get to win a game, something that is now plastered on the walls of the Sixers Penn Medicine training complex in Camden, New Jersey, is expect to win. So if the G League thing is dominate the simple, expect to win is on some bracelets that Nick Nurse has given out to the staff and the team and his assistant coaches. Expect to win can mean a lot of things. And to tie it back to his time in the minor leagues, it's like you might have a guy get called out of the lineup. You might make a trade. You might have guys who are sick, but you might be playing maybe a team that has more NBA experienced players that night in the minor league. But that doesn't change the fact that they expect to win every single night. It is a long season, and they're so focused every single day, him and his staff, on just trying to win that next game, while in the back of their mind, keeping this idea of another thing that he talks about a lot is AMJ, April, May, June. So they're building for April, May, June, the most important games of the NBA season, the playoffs, and hopefully bringing a championship to Philadelphia.
Obviously, Joel Embiid is having an MVP caliber season, and he's just leading the league in scoring again and is just absolutely incredible. What's something that stands out to you about Joel, not just as a player, but as a person?
Ooh, I mean, like when the Sixers are not playing, he's still a lot of times when we see him after a game in the locker room. This has been reported a lot. He's watching other NBA games like on his phone oftentimes. So
Really?
I think his passion for just the league and again, like back to trying to get that edge. I think he maybe part of what makes him so great and the MVP is that he's watching other games on a nightly basis and seeing what's working for other players at his position or how other teams are defending like a Jokic or something. So he's like truly a fan of basketball or at least like the strategy side of it. And then on the court there's not much more that we could say other than like he's improving upon an MVP season somehow. And a number
Crazy.
that I really like is the assists per game up to 6 when he averages 3.6 for his career. And there are assists to be had this year between him and Maxey. Obviously, Harden in the past was averaging a bunch of assists, but with Embiid, like at his size, to be able to cleanly execute some of these passes and to be averaging 6 assists with the league leading nearly 35 points and top 5 in rebounds, 11.8. Like the 6 assists really jumps out to me, and scoring that much alongside Maxey, who's going for like 26 a game, is very impressive.
We're speaking to Matt Murphy, who is the TV play-by-play announcer for the Delaware Blue Coats and is also the host of the Sixers pregame and postgame show on 97.5 The Fanatic and the fill-in play-by-play announcer for the Sixers as well. I do also want to get into Tyrese Maxey a little bit before we shift gears and we talk a little bit about just your background and everything. But in regards to Tyrese Maxey, it's just so much fun to just watch him on the court and just watch him ascend into this type of a player where he's just absolutely growing in so many different ways. He starts off, he comes into the NBA, he's shooting about 30% from three, and then he just takes this big skyrocket and just shoots over 43%. And it just shows that every single year he's just improved so much in the game and he just puts in the work. What is it like just being around him and just being able to see him from a day-to-day perspective?
An incredibly positive person to everyone. I mean, to anyone that he comes across, I've been impressed with like his name like recognition ability, not with like day to day people. Of course, he's gonna know everyone, but like somebody will come in like a film crew or journalists who are doing a feature on him or something, and he's quick to remember names. He's quick to greet people in a personal way. The on-court stuff, I said 25.9 points per game, which, by the way, is top 15 in the NBA with
It's crazy.
Embiid leading the league. So I've referenced this a couple of times on other platforms, but like he was at one point earlier this year averaging, he still might be, more points than Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton, who are kind of like the main scoring options on their particular
Yep.
teams, which how he does that alongside the guy who's averaging 35 in Embiid really jumped off the page to me. Obviously, those guys are all young stars in the 3 that I just mentioned, but on the court, off the court, smiling, positive. You want to be around people like that. And something that we all hear in the sports broadcasting industry is you never know who's watching your games. So a quick story
Right.
about that is when Jaden Springer was assigned to the Blue Coats earlier this season in his 3rd NBA season, Tyrese Maxey was tuned into unbeknownst to me, tuned into the broadcast that we were putting on in collaboration with Rowan University and myself and D
Right.
Lynham and Kayla Santiago on the call. I saw Tyrese maybe a day or two later, and he said that he was impressed with our broadcast and congratulated us on the broadcast. And turns out he was watching. So sometimes it's not just like, oh, like what executive might be tuned in. Sometimes you're speaking to players, teammates, other coaches around the league. So you always have to be at your best and hopefully delivering a good product, which we strive to do. But I thought that said a lot about his character as a teammate too, just to be checked into his guy, see how Springer did on that particular night in the G League.
Wow. That's really impressive. Wow, I had no idea about that story. That's so cool. Wow, that's absolutely incredible. I do want to start to shift gears, and I want to talk just more about you because you have just had this incredible career so far. You're the youngest NBA G League play-by-play announcer, which is just so awesome. And I want to talk about just the build up to the journey. So you're from South Jersey, correct? And you went to a Paul VI High School. But I wanted to
I
know,
did.
did you get any sort of broadcasting exposure from a young age? And did you know that this is what you wanted to go into?
It's interesting. I typically tell people that I picked it up in college, but I think like the foundation was there at a younger age. It's just that in high school, I was playing baseball. I played a little bit of basketball in high school. Our team was incredibly good. So I didn't play all 4 years of basketball, but was a baseball player into college. But like in high school, it
Wow.
wasn't the morning announcements or calling. There wasn't an opportunity, as far as I'm aware, to call the games themselves in high school. It's more so focused on playing at that time. And before that, I was just kind of around sports from a young age. My dad was the women's basketball coach at Drexel University when I was super young. So I probably more than some other kids had seen like radio announcers with headsets on, TV announcers, that kind of thing. And I basically grew up in the basketball gym, which probably makes sense as to why I pursued basketball and do more basketball than other sports right now.
Right.
So I was around it with my family. It was just like growing up in a sports family, but it was really college when I started to actually get the reps that we're talking about.
Now, how long did your dad coach for basketball?
He was at multiple schools, but head coaching wise, a handful of seasons at Drexel as the head women's coach. Like I was, 2, 3, 4 years old. So this was
Oh,
like
wow.
around the late 90s into early 2000s.
Wow, that's crazy. And what position did you play for baseball?
Oh, I never get to talk about this stuff. I'm sure it's thrilling for everyone. I was a left-handed pitcher. Those people are always
Really?
coddled because it's like maybe this guy could be something because he's lefty. It's funky. Um, so I was a pitcher and like a first baseman at the lower levels. I was the weird baseball player who batted right-handed and threw left-handed. It's
I think those are so cool.
not a
I
typical
really do.
conversation because I actually, or a combination, I should say. I actually threw the ball right-handed as a kid, and I switched to throwing left-handed because I thought I was better at throwing left-handed. So it was like having a catch one day. I actually, when instead of just joking around about throwing with the other hand, I fully switched at a young age to throwing the ball left-handed. And I had always written with my left hand. So I don't know why I
Huh.
didn't try to start. Maybe I wasn't writing that much when I was
Right.
super young playing sports. Um, so I just switched to do everything left-handed, other than like stick sports and batting and hockey and stuff like that. So I was a pitcher, and I played into college, but Fordham's Division I athletics. So I was not good enough to be on their team. I didn't try out or anything like that, but I tried out for the club baseball team and ended up playing all 4 years of that. So
Oh,
I
wow.
don't broadcast much baseball anymore, but that was definitely part of my college broadcasting experience. And who knows what
Right.
the future holds. I would love to get back to it soon.
Absolutely. I kind of want to piggyback more off the Fordham experience because you got involved with WFUV and you were just talking about how you got to do baseball and you got to do other sports with them. Just what was that experience like, and what do you remember just about learning about just the broadcasting side of stuff, and how did that shape you and influence you?
I didn't really know how many people had gone to Fordham and gone on to great success in the industry. My dad, who I said was a coach, grew up in New York, so he was more familiar with Fordham's reputation and he had known about some of the alums who had called games there, did talk shows there, and then have advanced into great positions. And like such as Mike Breen, the voice of the NBA Finals, and there's a list of others, including
Vin Scully.
Yeah, so Vin Scully is kind of like the patriarch of WFUV. He was actually a baseball player on Fordham who transitioned, as I understand it, into like some broadcasting reps.
Right.
But of course, the late great famous Dodgers announcer Vin Scully. And then there are some others, like a lot in the NBA actually, that I come across to this day. Ryan Ruocco, Spiro Ditas, Chris Carino with the Nets. So it was like a lot thrown at me at once to get up to speed on who these people were, like why they're so successful in the industry, figuring out how to hone my own voice and that type of thing. But I guess it was never a question of when I got on campus that I would pursue it, because it was very early on, like figuring out that we could be in professional locker rooms as college students, as beat reporters, which is why I put Fordham up against anybody, because other schools and markets have minor league access, but Fordham and Rowan now they have great opportunities that mirror kind of what Fordham had in the Philadelphia market.
It's incredible.
With the Blue Coats and the Blue Rocks and calling the games, that's elite experience. But at Fordham, we were able to cover all the New York professional teams. Like I covered the Devils, the Rangers, the Jets in the locker room as a college student. So I knew from the start when I heard about that I wanted to do it. Play-by-play reps coincided with all that, podcast reps. And it was about like finding my voice in like a podcast space, figuring it out on the play-by-play side. And it grew from there, but I knew I wanted to pursue basketball, play-by-play in general. And all those names I mentioned at the beginning of this who went to the school serve as great mentors for all of the current students.
Speaking of the beginning, every time I have a guest on in the beginning, and I don't know why I forgot about this, but I just realized I forgot about it, and then it just hit me right now. What would you say, because this is called Sharing the Mic with JJ, what would you say in college, like specifically, what was your favorite moment or a favorite time that you were on the mic with somebody that you got to share with?
Ooh, in college, I think I know the answer, because I'd probably say this either way, even though post-college, like anytime I get to share the mic with Lauren Rosen and Nick Stauskas, Tom McGinnis on the radio, D. Lynham with Blue Coats TV, like those are all
incredible,
fantastic. And I'm very lucky to do that. But I may have picked this college moment anyway, because it was just so profound for me. Part of my college experience was covering you might not like this because I've seen you wearing Patriots gear before. Was covering the Eagles-Patriots Super Bowl in Minnesota. And we were on Radio Row. It was myself and some other, students alongside me. It was like 4 or 5 of us every single day in the Mall of America, which served as Radio Row leading up to the Super Bowl 52, which we know how that game ended.
Yes.
But,
yes.
We had like Sal Palantonio on and a few people. One of them was Kevin Harlan, who calls the Super Bowl nationally for Westwood One radio. And at the end of the interview with Kevin Harlan, I mean, he was so kind. He's doing probably 50 interviews in a row that day, and then maybe over the course of multiple days while trying to prep for the biggest game in sports. And he's phenomenal. If anyone wants to learn more about like radio play-by-play, listen to Kevin Harlan, man. His description is unbelievable. But at the end of the interview, he said about his job and working in this industry, it's like when you wake up in the morning, your feet hit the ground and there's nowhere else you'd rather be, or there's nothing else you'd rather be doing. It doesn't feel like work. That kind of sentiment from Kevin Harlan, like sharing that moment on the microphone, on the headsets with him in that setting at a Super Bowl as someone soon to be graduating and entering the sports media field. It came at the perfect time. It's something I still think about every day when it doesn't feel like work that we get to do.
Now, that particular story that you got to share with Kevin Harlan, I know that you did do some work with Westwood One, and you were also a board operator for them. Was that during that time?
Helped me a lot. I think it helped us land the Kevin Harlan interview for sure. I was behind the scenes at Westwood One That's awesome. An intern for a semester, but he's like very generous to students anyway. But I think it helped. And it helped me a ton. It was the spring semester of maybe my junior year. So this might have been the year before the Eagles Super Bowl, the previous spring. So like months before. And it was hugely beneficial to me to learn broadcasting, because even if you're behind the scenes and you want to be in front of the camera or on the microphone, you can learn from everybody. The Kevin Harlans, and I was cutting highlights for not just his broadcasts of the Super Bowl, but I was cutting highlights for a whole NCAA basketball season, March Madness, all the NFL announcers throughout that whole season. So you're picking up little things. You're never copying somebody, but you're figuring out what might work for somebody and a certain turn of phrase. And especially with Harlan and his description, I was locked in on learning how to do football from him. Still use a lot of that stuff today. That was the Falcons blowing the Super Bowl to the Patriots, and I was like in the back cutting those audio highlights for Westwood One.
Wow. That's absolutely incredible. Now, during your final year, okay, you won the Marty Glickman Award. I wanted you to talk a little bit about that award, like what it is, and what was that feeling like when you received that?
It was the culmination of putting into practice like advice from Fordham alums who are in the business, and Bob Aarons is the legendary executive producer of WFUV Sports. And he had told me, like, maybe my sophomore year, he was so good at like listening to a segment of your basketball play-by-play and critiquing it and helping you and just instilling confidence in young people. And he had told me years before, you could really do this. And it wasn't perfect. He was probably in the middle of saying, like, if Jones has the ball on the right wing, you don't need to say Jones dribbling on the right wing, Jones down on the right block, Jones shoots, because Jones did all of those actions, So he's probably in the middle of telling me something like that. But he looked at me and said, you can do this. So he thought like the foundation was there of someone who could pursue a play-by-play career. And then the Marty Glickman Award is given to the top play-by-play broadcaster at Fordham's WFUV Sports. So it was the culmination of that. It's a panel of alums who select the person, and it's named after the legendary broadcaster Marty Glickman, who actually invented a lot of the basketball terminology that you hear on the radio. So he has a book out there. People should look into Marty's experience. He did multiple sports, but football with like the Jets and Giants and Knicks and various things in New York. One thing that he said was always consider the listener. So I write that every single time I do a game. The bottom of my sheets, I write an abbreviated version or an acronym. Always consider the listener, because for a specific game, your listener might be mostly family and friends of high school players, or it might be the greater Philadelphia area, or I'm just trying to figure out like who's out there, who might be listening. You never know who's listening, but that's something that I take from Marty Glickman. And it was a great honor. Ironically, I had lost my voice before I got the trophy. So I couldn't say anything. They're like, here's an award given to a guy who announces games here. And I just like got up there and got off the stage. I legit had like laryngitis or something. Like I went to like the medical center and all this stuff, and I had to write notes down to tell them what was going on. Like I could not say a single word at the time I was being honored for talking.
That sucks. Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
People probably just thought, oh, he
just took the award.
He's a little stage fright, I guess, of a crowd, which is totally different than calling a game where you can't actually see your audience. But it was not a nerves thing. It was just that I had no voice.
Physically.
Yeah,
you physically couldn't talk. Again, in case you are just tuning in, we are talking to Matt Murphy, the play-by-play announcer for the Delaware Blue Coats. So then after college, all right, you're able to get into football, and you called games. You were able to do stuff for Alvernia, and now you're with Eastern University. So just talk about those experiences and what it was like to just be able to call football games for CBS radio and all those types of stuff?
Calling football, I had less experience doing in college because at a lot of colleges and universities, there are just less games on the schedule, and only so
Right.
many people can do these things. So I had gotten to do a ton of basketball games, sometimes because the other announcers were off doing football, the seasons cross over.
Right.
Football was like a highly coveted thing. When I was in college, the running back on our football team at Fordham was Chase Edmonds, who's still in the NFL. He was setting all sorts of Patriot League records at the time. You get to go to like Army, Navy, like play one of or two, both of those two teams over multiple years. So there was like a lot of prestige around football. So I really needed to get reps after college in football, and I did that at Alvernia. Worked with a company called Jacob Media.
Yep.
They're still on the scene here in the Philadelphia area, and that's how I shifted over to Eastern University more recently. But that's been a great experience because I needed those reps at the start, and both colleges were actually first-year football programs, so they had never had a team. So the two schools I've called football for had never existed as football teams before I started there.
Wow.
So Alvernia started a program in 2018, and then more recently, Eastern University on the main line in the Philadelphia area just got a team as well. So I called their season here in 2023 season, and I've had the same partners a lot of the way. Jacob is Joe Kraus and Warren Schmidt, but my main analyst has been Bernie Nowatarski, who's a legendary football player from the Reading area who played at Kutztown, was a coach with the Philadelphia Soul in the Arena League. So working with him at both Alvernia and Eastern has been fantastic. I cherish the relationship with someone like Bernie and calling games with him equally as much as I do just the repetition of doing football. Football is very hard to call. Like
Yeah.
people say hockey is really hard to call, but I think I adjusted to the pacing of basketball, maybe because I had more exposure to it from a young age more
Right.
quickly than I did with calling a football game. But there's 100 guys on each team, and they're
Yeah.
like, no, that guy's number 0 on the offense, that guy's number 0 on the defense, and actually this other guy, he just switched his number from 7 to 0 during the middle of the week, so now he's number 0 on the defense. It's
Right.
just a lot going on. In basketball, it's like 12 to 15 guys that you have to know about on each side. So it's a lot of preparation to call a football game. So it's been nice to do that in the fall to kind of flip that part of my brain on.
So when you found out, all right, that you were going to be doing Blue Coats games, when you got the call and when Alex and everybody from the organization reached out to you, what was the first thing that entered into Matt Murphy's mind?
Wow. So it was in a sports broadcasting class, like a college course called sports broadcasting, when I got an email about, in reply to my broadcasting tape that I had sent in, and there wasn't a job description or anything. It was a cold email. But I got a reply back while I was sitting in a college course called sports broadcasting that they would like to speak with me for an interview at the training complex in Camden. And I'm from South Jersey, like you said. So the Sixers are one of my hometown teams. So the whole dream come true type cliche plays in. But I think about the setting more than anything else, because it's like you're sitting in a class that's teaching you about sports broadcasting when like the early stages of what hopefully becomes your career is taking shape, like in your email. So I don't know if I paid attention as much to the rest of the lecture that day. I was probably like, oh, I probably, like any broadcaster, started preparing for the event, which in this case was just a conversation in Camden. And
Yeah.
that's a huge piece of advice that I give people. You got to know as much about like the people interviewing you as you possibly can, as if you were about to call like a sporting event that featured them, because yes, a lot of the questions are about your experience, but you got to know who you're speaking with. So that was like a big thing for me. I probably went straight into that mode. But it was like an indescribable feeling, because I was less familiar with the G League at the time, but I knew that it was a direct affiliation with the Sixers, and I quickly learned as much as I could about everything. And then from there, everything just kind of happened since. They were moving arenas to Chase Fieldhouse in Wilmington. It was a year of a lot of expansion for them, like getting a new arena. They changed their logo. There was a lot going on, and I was wearing multiple hats, but there was no better place for me to start. I know something that Alex Yo likes to mention is that before I was even in the door as alongside them all, I attended their groundbreaking event for the new arena. I don't think I was invited. It was just like I saw on social media they were having a groundbreaking in Delaware.
Right.
Had talked to the people before, but figured it would be good to show up, support, offer how I could help in any way. And that's part of my start at the Blue Coats.
I always tell people that networking is always an important thing, and just being able to just put in the work. But what would you say is like the biggest misconception about broadcasting, or about like broadcasters in general?
Ooh.
I know I like try to like come up with these things like in my head, some of these things.
By the way, anytime you're asking me about like a feeling or like those are like my favorite types of questions, like not to answer. I'm just saying to ask people, to hear other people on podcasts and shows, like, because it elicits like an emotional response. And I remember Rowan Sports Cam put out like your guys' reactions, I think, to getting the Blue Coats opportunities. And that was so special to you. And I think about that a lot when you were selected.
Absolutely.
That was awesome.
That was the year that unfortunately my brother passed, and it was just like so many things, that was during the COVID year and shut down and all that. And just to be able to have that opportunity, that was just, it opened so many doors, and it was so special.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, I think about that a lot. So I'm glad that it helped you and continues to help you. But when it comes to the industry as a whole, I do tend to agree that there's a misconception of like the preparation process and people thinking that it's easier than it is. They might not say it so much, but it feels as though people think they could just like step in and start calling a game. But a lot goes into what the best broadcasters in the world do. So that would be the first thing that pops into my head on like misconceptions. And I think like the value of a broadcaster, like we've seen like alternate broadcasts, but those are still people on the microphone, like something like the Manning cast. It's still announcers. Historically, we've seen like no announcer broadcasts. And like, I don't think that went too well, because you need multiple people in a lot of cases to guide you along. And what I love about broadcasting is storytelling. So that's another cliche, but there's like an ambulance going by flashing the lights on me. So sorry about that. But
you're good.
I love the storytelling aspect of broadcasting. And so I think a misconception would be like anyone who places less value on how broadcasters further the stories of the participants in a game, like any game, like any level, to have somebody guiding you along the event and telling you about who's participating and putting a personal touch on it. High school, college, pro, minor leagues, major leagues. I think like serving as like sort of like a tour guide for the event that is like the game. And that's not to mention the analyst next to you, who's oftentimes a former pro or a player who is breaking the why and how something happened down. But for the play-by-play people, I think sometimes a misconception is that their value is maybe undervalued, of advancing the story, giving you the background on these people, because you see it every year with big events like the Super Bowl, those storylines coming in, like whether it's the Kelsey brothers facing each other, but just like getting the interviews, getting the story, and delivering it in a concise way when the game is going on. I really love as a viewer.
You talk a lot about storytelling, because I honestly love that aspect about it too. And I think that that's that's just what makes the broadcasting side of things so cool. And shout out to Derek Jones. He's our station manager at the radio station. He taught us in TV that like the most important people for the broadcast, like the number one is the graphics operator and the director and then the producer, because it's more about a team of people. And I've always learned that in this field, it doesn't matter which role that you're in. It doesn't matter what you're doing, if you're on teleprompter, if you're literally doing the graphics, or if you're a gaffer, or whatever it is, you're a part of the storytelling as well. And I think that that's just what makes this field so unique and just so powerful, you know?
Yeah, that might not be this, or what I'm about to say might not be a misconception, but what you're talking about is it's truly a team effort, especially on television. Something that people might not know is how much work goes in behind the scenes on building out the graphics that they're
Yeah.
seeing. And not just the graphics, but building out the entire run of show for a telecast specifically. You're
Yeah.
talking to so many people on a crew, the people at the highest level for like an NFL game. Um, a lot goes into it that week with stuff they have ready in case the game gets out of hand, stuff they have ready at certain moments in the game, how early they want to get to something, working with reporters on the sidelines, working with the camera operators to show certain things that are happening in the stadium. So again, super valuable to have
Yeah.
eyes and ears at the venue with which the game is at which the game is happening to help
Yeah.
serve the audience around the world.
That doesn't even include EVS and all the people that like work behind in the truck, that work the switchers and all those types of things.
There are a
So,
lot of roles that people don't know about. So like that's a
so
great way to
many.
come around on this answer of you saying like what maybe people don't know or get incorrect. It's like how many people there are involved with this stuff as I'm losing daylight here in the home studio. I need somebody on my crew to light my screen up a little bit.
That's funny. Oh my gosh. I did want to ask you about your color commentators and just about the partners that you work with on the air. So in regards to, learning about how to set up your color commentators and how to set up your guests, what's something that you had to learn early on, like whether it was with D or whether it was with, any broadcasting partner that you had?
Figuring out like what types of questions to ask. I think that's something else I'm still working on to this day. Working with all the people that I've already mentioned, like D is the person I work with most on TV. Sixers radio is solo when I'm filling in for Tom, but I speak with him at various points throughout the Sixers radio broadcast. And then like podcasting, co-hosting is a little bit of a different game. But like I remember in college, I was serving as an analyst for a basketball game and being asked like, what questions are you comfortable with me, the play-by-play person, ask someone saying to me, are you comfortable with me asking you this question or that question? So I think like having an understanding of what direct questions they might want to answer, because not everything on a game broadcast is what happened on that play. It might be like oftentimes they're just like leading sentences. Like
Sure.
the Blue Coats are off to a
Yep.
great start tonight is not a question, but like a leading topic. So I think knowing a lot, just like knowing an interviewer for a
Sure.
job interview, knowing your partner before a broadcast, their background a little bit too, where they went to school, where they reported, where they played, where they coached. That stuff is huge because if you're calling whenever UCLA gets brought up, that's an automatic mention from me with D because she went there. We talk a lot about the Iverson days with the Sixers when she was a reporter. She still covers the Sixers, but when she was the regular sideline reporter. And then I've called games with people who have coached at Villanova, and it's like, okay, this person played there. What might they have learned at Villanova? And that elicited a great response last season when Jermaine Samuels was playing against the Blue Coats. He liked to go to a 2-foot jump stop and working off of 2 feet in the lane. But I only brought that up because I knew the person I was working with at the time, Ashley Howard and Jason Crafton for that matter, both were on the coaching staffs at Villanova. So they might have more to say about how they teach that play in the lane. And they did.
Talk about working with Tom McGinnis and what that, how much he has inspired you and just how much of a big influence that he's been.
It's very cool to get to work with him on every Sixers game this season for the first time in the 2023-24 season, because he's in his 29th year as the radio voice of the Sixers, and he knows so much about Sixers history, NBA history. He delivers the games in such a passionate way. If you're in your car, you might be running out for 5 minutes, but Tom is gonna tell you everything that's happening in the game in an excitable way that makes you want to keep listening, stay in your car longer. I've learned a lot from him already. In years past, he's been a great mentor to me, something that I picked up from him early, even before we were working together regularly, is picking the brains of assistant coaches and staff members on both teams on the court before a game, because that might be some of the best stuff you got. You could sit at your computer for 24 hours before a game, 48 hours, and not come up with something as good as you might get from an assistant coach. And Tom does a fantastic job of just being in the right places at the right moments to get those little tidbits from staff members, NBA legends who are in the house, all that type of thing. So it is very cool because being from the area, I've heard Tom for my whole life, basically. And and my brother was like an honorary ball boy one time for his birthday at a Sixers game in 2003.
Really?
And
oh my gosh.
Just for like a one game, he wasn't like a full season guy. But I remember like being in the arena, Sixers Kings in 2003, Peja Stojakovic and Vlade Divac against the Sixers, and sitting kind of like 20 rows off the court, better seats because my brother was, I don't know, maybe you get him for being the ball boy or something. And just like that's a similar area, like amount of rows up that the broadcast section is for a Sixers home game. So like doing that as a kid, feeling the excitement. And Tom provides all that on the radio, but we had like the thunder sticks for free throws, like clapping those, and now to sit in a similar area and be part of the broadcast, that's what makes it extra special for me.
Do you have any pregame rituals that you do before Blue Coats or even before Sixers games or before you go on the air?
Great question. I do. I don't like consciously think of them, but coffee intake is like a big thing for me. Like I try to have 2 to 3 coffees throughout a game day. Well, throughout like the entire day and night. So I'll usually have one like during the game or right before the game. But so there's that. The thing I said about writing the Marty Glickman phrase, always consider the listener, is something that I do every single time I have my game boards in front of me. Obviously, a lot of the preparation stats wise remains the same. So yeah, it would probably be like making sure that I'm well caffeinated and that I have that in mind to keep that phrase in mind to keep with me throughout a game. And then something like just watching warm-ups and just trying to, like I said with Tom McGinnis, just get those last minute conversations in. It is sort of part of my routine at this point, just because you might get something really like a really good like nugget to share on the broadcast. Mike Breen, Fordham guy, voice of the NBA Finals, says that you might only use 10% of what you prepare for a given game, but I find that I'm using 100% of what I find out at the arena. Like, so like I might only be using 10-20% of my preparation at home, but I'm using the stuff that I hear right before tip off like all the time.
Absolutely. I really appreciate your time. I'm not gonna I don't want to hold you up for like too much longer because I know that it is getting dark over there.
Do I need to turn a light on here for the sake of the show? That's better. But we were recording right at the window of the sunset in the Philadelphia area. So now people can see me again. So look at that. Live show, live television. We used to,
Oh,
Bob
it's the
Aaron's, the
best.
legendary Fordham mentor, is like, when stuff's live, stuff happens, but he didn't say
Right.
stuff.
I know I'm like going all around, but I never really got to ask you about just the experience of being in the bubble and just being able to go down to Orlando. Of course, when I was there, of course, I was at the radio station. We were calling the games off of a monitor, but we were attending the press conferences too, virtually. But you were always making sure that the mics were set up for Connor Johnson and for all the
Oh
players that
yeah,
were there. Rajon Tucker. Oh my gosh! But
I
like,
forgot
what was
about
that
that
whole?
part.
Yeah, yeah. What was the whole experience like of just being in the bubble and just seeing the players and being away from your family?
It was draining. Yeah, I had moved to Conshohocken, Pennsylvania at the time. I was in a new place, and I just kind of up and left Liz, and um, I mean, she held it down, but
Right.
it was a work trip, and it was a great experience first and foremost. But it ended up being like almost, I want to say, like 2 months of time or something like that. So definitely like a significant event in my life, and I remember the Blue Coats championship game vividly. The confetti was falling for the
Yes.
Lakeland Magic over, now the Osceola Magic. They moved cities, but
Really? Oh my
yeah.
gosh, I did
Mac
not know
McClung is
that.
on their team this season in the G League, former
Wow.
Sixer and Blue Coat
Yep.
of the Blue Coats championship team. But
Yes.
so they got their vengeance this year, but not over the Magic. I remember that. Like I'll always remember the confetti falling on us on the losing side of things.
Oh my
I was
gosh.
doing, like you said, setting up the press conferences. There were, I don't know, the media restrictions at that time for the G League compared to the NBA bubble, which preceded it.
Right.
Um, but a lot of it was done on Zoom for anyone covering it from Philly, South Jersey, Delaware, nationally, who wanted to cover the Blue Coats or the G League. So it was all over the internet. And I was the worst part of that was that our backdrop, which was the Blue Coats logo, it was like a giant book sock. So if you had like
Oh my
book socks
gosh.
as a kid, instead of like
Yeah.
velcroing on, and this was all the games were happening, and this is like nitty gritty G League stuff, but hopefully someone enjoys it. All the games were in like the same arena or two, like two different sites. So there was another game happening before you and after you all the time. So it was like it was a test of speed to get this backdrop up for. There were a good amount of people who covered that Blue Coats run on the internet.
Yeah.
So I would have to get essentially a giant book sock over a frame every game when the players would speak into the computer. And
Oh
as
my
a one-man
gosh.
job, it wasn't easy because it was like 8 feet
No.
tall or something. And then I would have to rip it down afterwards. I wish it just like stuck up there, but it did not. It went over the top. So that was something that I'll remember, for better or worse. But it was great. I mean, I called the games. I did a lot of the PR, handling the interviews. Paul Reed was in there with the Blue Coats. That was
Yep.
his MVP Rookie of the Year season. He shot 44% from 3-point range that year
Beautiful.
in the G League. Isaiah Joe came in at one point. They had some great wins along the way
Yeah.
in the playoffs. They beat,
Rajon Tucker, man, he was
yeah,
athletic.
he's still producing highlights on social media with some of his
He is.
dunks overseas, Rajon Tucker.
Yep.
But yeah, I'll remember the run. They beat some really good teams. They beat the Raptors 905, which had Nick Stauskas
Yep.
in the playoffs. And the Raptors were the best team. So that was like a nationally televised game. I was on the local call, but that was a huge win. It was an upset. And earlier in the season, that was the first year of Ignite, G League Ignite, with
Yep.
a team that had Jalen Green, who went on to become the number 2 pick by the Houston Rockets. There was like a film crew following them around for the whole season in the bubble. So that's
Yep.
something else that I'll remember, is getting my first look at Jalen Green, Kuminga, and that Ignite team. That
Jared Jack was on there too, I believe.
Yeah, he's now an NBA assistant coach, Jarrett Jack, and they always have like the veteran players who are helping them out. But I remember, like, just going to breakfast and there's Jalen Green with a camera crew, and so it was a really unique experience, but a great one.
Absolutely. I'll never forget. I think that you were doing your first Sixers game, and it was the next season after that.
Next
That's when we
season,
were
yep.
back in person, and just tying it all back to just learning how to just, be a sponge and being able to just take in so many opportunities and never really say no and just be willing to always help out. There was a game, it was the first game that you were doing for the Sixers, and Derek filled in for doing the TV play-by-play. And I just remember, like, I was doing timeout coordinating, and it was really cool to just be able to have Duck like talking in my ear and just being able to fade up the mics and everything for D and for Derek, and also just being also just talking to the refs and making sure that we take the TV timeouts at certain
Yeah.
spots. Like, that was a really cool experience, and that really opened my eyes up to so much stuff about just the TV production side of stuff.
It's
And
really it's a competitive
it's
field, but at the
it
end of the
is
day, a lot of people are still, filling in for one another,
for sure.
friendly with one another, helping people. Oftentimes, when it's a younger broadcaster with an older broadcaster, the older person is critiquing their work, and
Sure.
you can never self critique enough. But there is like a lot of good relationships that are formed through broadcasting, and like I've gotten to know Derek, and he's been fantastic, and you got to work with him and Dee that night, and I got to fill in. That was like the end of October
Yep.
in 2021, which is another game that I could have pinpointed as like that special moment on sharing the mic
Yep.
earlier in this show. But that was cool because that night in Philadelphia, I had my family was able to just through, people I've met along the way, I was able to get tickets because the person who I'd worked with so closely, Justine at the Blue Coats,
Yep.
she was promoted to the Sixers. She helped me get some seats for my family, my first NBA game that were located right behind the broadcast section. So I had my immediate family members like watching me do my NBA debut from like the row right behind where the broadcasters are.
I was so happy for you that night. Like, as soon as I found out about it, I was like, "This is incredible," and Matt definitely deserves this, and I'm so happy.
Thank you, man. That's really nice of you. I appreciate the support.
No, no, absolutely. Before I let you go, I do have to ask you. Of course, you talked a little bit about it before, but uh, your thoughts about just giving advice to other young broadcasters, young journalists, and people that want to get involved with the sports media game. What would you say is like a really good piece of advice, or just a cool tip or a cool story that you've heard from other people that you've gotten to work with?
I always tell like students to say yes to opportunities like me with Westwood One when it was behind the scenes, that internship. And I didn't know if I wanted to be like a behind the scenes producer. I probably didn't. But it helped my on air experience. It helped me on air because I was hearing other great broadcasters at the top of their profession. So my thing with like college age and high school students and people who are just, pursuing it with whatever level of education they have, I always say yes to every opportunity to call a game, to get an internship, even if it's not the exact one that you had in mind. But a lot of people know that. A lot of people are saying yes to the opportunities. So when it comes to networking, I always advise to keep in touch in an appropriate way and not always text or email someone when you see a job posting or a job opening, but
Right.
rather if they achieve a career milestone or a personal milestone, they have a kid or they post about something, reaching out in ways that aren't so self minded, or
Right.
that's not the right phrase, but like kind of just being a normal, nice, being kind to
Person.
people, like
Yes.
being personable. Yeah, like finding time to just talk to them about things that are outside. And we all could be better at this, myself included, but finding
Yep.
ways to hit them up at times that aren't always so, can you help me? Can you do this for me? Can you do that?
Right.
I think that's a big part that's missed with networking. Um,
Absolutely.
and then like just last thing,
Yeah, go for it.
this is probably the longest sharing. This might be the longest episode in the history. So this is a
This
24-hour
is
stream now. We're gonna keep it
I've
going.
I've had a couple. I've had a couple for like 2 hours.
The
I've had a
sun's
couple
gonna come
for
up. I'm gonna have to
2
turn
hours.
these lights back off. I won't need the stage lighting anymore. But the last thing is like when we outlined how big the crew can be that you're working with.
Yep.
Talking to everyone, and again, like you don't know, like a certain night I might be behind on my prep, so I don't talk to everyone I want to talk to before a game, but that's on me. Like I should have been in a better place when I showed up at the arena so that I can talk to everyone, make sure that we're ready to have a great broadcast,
Right.
make sure everyone's on the same page. But I think like even just saying hello to everyone you're going to be working with, it seems like a daunting task because it can be a lot of people. Just being personable when you're there on site too, outside of being personable when networking electronically, I think are two huge keys.
Absolutely. Matt, thank you so much for doing this. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and please just keep up the incredible work that you're doing with the Sixers and with the Blue Coats. You absolutely rock.
Thank you, Jason. JJ, appreciate it. I had a lot of fun, and
Yep.
I'm really happy to see everything you're doing with the channel. Subscribe. What's the channel name? Subscribe.
Play by play with JJ. I was gonna ask you, you can feel free to, talk about and plug in your socials if people like want to follow you as well. You can feel free to do that. And I wanted to give you the floor if you wanted to do that.
Yeah. Very common name is my Matt Murphy. So my handle has to include some other stuff. So it's Matt_Murphy 04. And the 04 part comes from, I used to really like watching JJ Redick play basketball. So when he was number 4 in college, I just always liked that number. So that's the origin story. But yeah, that should be the handle on most platforms, Matt_Murphy 04. Matt Murphy, most iterations of Matt Murphy are taken on social media.
Are they really?
Yeah, it's a very common name, but it's cool.
That's awesome. Thanks so much again, guys, for tuning in. We're going to be coming back on with more episodes for sure. And I'll catch you all in the next one. Thanks again.